Hello, I'm Tammy Dorr, President and CEO of the Downtown Denver Partnership and co-founder of Denver Startup Week. This week is so important. It's important for us to come together and think big and boldly about our future, to dream and have visions for companies. These companies that are built today will be our economic strength, our economic drivers, and our economic saviors for the future of both our region, our state, and our country. We don't take it lightly. Come together during this week and make things happen. Before we dive in, we want to say a special thank you to our 2020 Denver Startup Week sponsors who make it all possible. Thanks to our title sponsors, Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Zero. And our track sponsors who have made all of the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 and the Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement to all of you this week. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPRagency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors. They're all listed on the screen. Thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now, make things happen.
At Zayo, our fiber fuels global innovation. Everything we do, everything we can imagine. Never in history has innovation happened at such a rapid pace. And all of it depends on bandwidth connectivity. Millions of miles of Zayo's fiber span the globe, traveling unique routes, providing dense metro footprints, offering next-generation solutions. We didn't just see the future of fiber, we built it, we delivered it. Every millisecond, our fiber is fueling crucial operations, breakthroughs, and innovations for the world's most impactful companies. Companies that are disrupting the status quo, igniting imaginations, revolutionizing industries, and creating brand new ones. Our customers are advancing wireless communication, transforming healthcare, changing education, revolutionizing transportation, redefining banking, powering retail, and upping the game in esports. These innovators rely on Zayo's fast, secure fiber networks to connect their offices, factories, data centers, clouds, exchanges, venues, and more, ultimately fueling innovation and transforming lives. And behind those fiber connections, Zayo is all about human connections. We take ownership in all we do. Our employees take the initiative to deliver trusted solutions to every customer and make their experience effortless. We are energetic and entrepreneurial, a partner to rely on. We are Zayo. We are working with our customers on what comes next, constantly anticipating what can be. We are fueling global innovation that is changing the world.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. First of all, let me say thanks to our track sponsor, Zayo. Thanks for that video, and thanks for helping make this possible. And we're really excited for this panel today. We get to turn the tables on some of our favorite reporters here in Colorado and ask them some questions, as opposed to them asking you questions all the time. But hopefully we'll get something out of this. We've got a lot of folks here. So a couple of housekeeping items. You'll see at the bottom of your screen that you've got both a chat and a Q&A function, and we're going to be watching the chat function today. So if you have a question, please drop it into the chat function. I'll be taking a look at it, and we'll just make this as interactive as possible. We don't have to wait till the end to go through all of our questions. So by means of introduction, I'm Doyle Albee. I'm with MAPRagency, and we have put this together today, and we're really excited to do this. We've done similar panels with startup weeks in Boulder and Denver and all sorts of different places, and they're always just hugely helpful. And so I think today's going to be no exception to that. So thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists who are the stars of our show here in no particular order, but we'll start with Tamara Chuang, who is with the Colorado Sun, and she writes business and technology. and is actually one of the co-founders of the Colorado Sun. I think there were 9 original co-founders. Is that right, Tamara? 10 original co-founders. So it was you and 9 others. I knew I had something there in my notes. But I will let her talk a little bit more about the Colorado Sun, but a great outlet for news here in Colorado. If you're not a subscriber and supporter, I encourage you to be. In fact, let me just say this. We've got the Denver Business Journal here, the Colorado Sun, and the Boulder Beat. And all of these folks are not only great journalists, but they're businesses. So let me just please give a shout out. If you're not subscribing to great Colorado local news, please take a minute and subscribe to each one of these outlets. We subscribe to all of them, and it's really important not only to have these folks, but they've all got to eat as well and pay rent and do all those kind of good things. So let's make sure that we're supporting our local journalism as we're a part of this. So with that, I'm going to dive back in. So Tamara has been with the Colorado Sun for a couple of years now. They just had their 2-year anniversary last Thursday. Had a great, it would have been a good party if it weren't for COVID-19, and it was a good online party as it turned out. So happy to be there. During the pandemic, Tamara has taken the opportunity to plunge deeper into coverage of small business, cybersecurity, fraud, and unemployment. And so we're going to have a great opportunity to talk to Tamara about the kind of stories that she looks for. Next up, we have Jensen Worley, who is a reporter at the Denver Business Journal, where she covers both tech and healthcare. And I'm excited to have Jensen on the panel today because she's really made her career in business reporting, and she believes that it can be a window into what makes communities tick. And she's written for a number of business outlets, including BizWest in Boulder and Northern Colorado, which is where we first got to know her. Now with Denver Business Journal, and I think it's going to be great to have Jensen here and compare and contrast a little bit between Tamara and Shay. What is the difference in looking for a story for a truly business focused outlet versus a more general news outlet like Tamara and Shay both work with? So we'll have some good conversations around that, I think. And then Shay Castle finally is the owner and publisher of Boulder Beat News, which is an independent digital news outlet covering local government and politics in Boulder. And just before we started, I was actually giving Shay a little shout out. She just did an amazing piece. We've got a big issue on the ballot up here, deciding whether or not we want to be our own municipal utility here in Boulder. And Shay did, gosh, Shay, what was it, a couple thousand words? It was one of the longer pieces I've seen for a while, but it was absolutely outstanding and very, very helpful. So thank you so much for that work.
Actually didn't look at the word count. Now I should. I know that my notes to write it were 59 pages, and I think the story itself in Google Docs was like 14. So I don't know how many words that is, but it was one of my longer pieces for sure.
It was a great long form piece, and you know, by supporting Shay and Jensen and Tamara and the publications they work for, we can get true great long form pieces like that go into things. But I've talked more than enough here, I think, already. So I'm going to turn it over and let's maybe go in reverse order. I'll start with Shay. Talk to us a little bit about the kinds of stories that you work on. And Shay, I know you're a little bit different from a business angle, that you're working on a lot of local issues, but local issues a lot of times involve business. So talk to us maybe, and I'll throw this around to everybody. What kind of stories do you like to see? What are you looking for? And I don't want to make this so much a how to get into the Boulder Beat or how to get in the Denver Business Journal. I want to make this how to work with and engage with journalists in a meaningful way that can be helpful both to the startups that are in the audience as well as to the journalists that are looking to cover stories.
Great. Well, I do cover primarily government, but business and government obviously intersect quite a lot. And particularly during the time of COVID, the local government was doing a lot to help inform businesses as to what the guidelines were, what the laws were, and how they could safely operate once they could reopen and when they needed to shut down. So I did a number of stories that intersected with the business community, including local help that was available, how businesses were adapting. It doesn't always overlap with business because sometimes government is just government, but I could probably play a game, like 6 degrees of separation. I could probably play a game of 6 degrees or less of how this government issue interacts with your business. So I do touch on a lot of issues that are really critical to business owners in Boulder.
Great, thanks. Tamara, we mentioned kind of as part of your bio some of the changes that you've made in your coverage. as a part of COVID, but just also as a part of the Colorado Sun versus your previous position with the Denver Post. How do you look at business a little bit differently, knowing that people don't turn to the Colorado Sun just for business? They're looking for Colorado news in general. And how do you fit business into that?
Yeah, actually, in some ways, it's a little easier because my beat is so broad now. And I feel like at the Denver Post, there was just so much happening in technology, because I was a technology reporter there, that I had to limit myself at some point to only Denver or just outside, maybe to Boulder a little bit. I think you had brought up earlier that I had set limits on or minimums on venture funding. To get my attention, I needed to hear that your company raised at least $10 million or something like that. But now at the Colorado Sun, we're really different from what the Denver Post is doing, and hopefully from what other folks are doing here, although maybe closer to what Shay's doing, trying to go more in depth about fewer stories. So, I am interested in stuff that's happening all over Colorado. I look for more of these universal business, universal business topics that bring in a whole community of, say, business owners. Excuse me.
You've got COVID-19, I think, Tamara.
Yeah, really.
I shouldn't joke about it.
I've been shut in for months, so of course I'm now coughing.
That's okay.
Anyway.
And Jensen, I left you for last on this question very intentionally, because you're, I think, our only panelist who writes for an exclusive business publication. And that's been the bulk of your career, I think, since I've known you, even before you moved to Colorado. So tell me how you look at stories a little bit differently, and what your angles probably differ from the Colorado Sun and from an outlet like Boulder Beat.
Yeah, so I think about my stories in a few ways. First, I'm doing hyper local. I'm really limiting myself to the Denver metro area. There's great business publications all over the state, Colorado Springs, Boulder, and I will touch on those areas sometimes, especially Boulder. I kind of include in the Denver metro, but I really am trying to stay hyper local on Denver metro news for Denver Business Journal. I'm also thinking about my stories in terms of real analysis of what each news item means for the business community. We're a subscription-based paper. So the way I think about it, there's so many ways that you can get news that's free, that's not with the business lens. And so you can get the same Amazon announcement from a lot of different ways. What I'm trying to do is you're paying for this in-depth analysis on what this particular announcement means. What does it mean for the tech community? What does it mean for economic development? What's different about this announcement versus one that they maybe made 6 months ago? So that's really what I'm trying to do, is hyper-local, in-depth business analysis for the business community, whether you're a startup founder, CEO, somewhere in between. Business touches a lot of different venues, but I am trying to write with that business reader in mind at all times.
Great. I'm going to stay with you for just a second, because I'd love you to do a little bit of compare and contrast, because you've got a new sister publication in Colorado Inno, which is part of, I think maybe a lot of people don't know. So if you want to take a second and talk about American City outlet, and then how the business journals fit into that, and then where you guys are taking it with Colorado Inno, I think that could be very interesting for the audience, since I know Nick at Colorado Inno focuses on a lot of startups, and maybe kind of where Nick stops and Jensen starts, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you bring that up, because just recently that relationship has changed a little bit. So broadly, Denver Business Journal is part of, I think 40, oh, there goes my dog, of course, 40 other American City Business Journal publications. So we're part of a, you okay, buddy? We're part of a national network of business journals. So that is sort of one interesting thing. What's getting read in Denver Business Journal could also be picked up in Silicon Valley Business Journal, San Francisco Business Times. So especially now with so many Bay Area companies coming to Denver, that happens a lot. So even though I'm staying hyper local, sometimes my stories are being read nationally through the network. We have American Inno, Nick at Colorado Inno, was a sister publication. Now they've actually been brought, Nick has been brought into the Denver Business Journal umbrella. So he is a co-reporter with me, still the American Inno reporter, but while Inno and DBJ were kind of really separate and there's a little bit of a firewall between, now we've actually started collaborating a lot more, a little bit of more shared readership, shared backend. But what that means practically for companies is Nick is really focused on the startup community, and that's pretty much what he exclusively covers. I cover Denver tech. I will cover startups, but a lot of times I'm looking for those Series B, C growth stage startups. If you're a baby company, then Nick is really your person. He does a great job at really covering startups 24/7. He does not miss anything.
He's great to work with, but you both are. So Tamara, compare and contrast that for me a little bit. So Jensen and Nick, their story is the fact that a business exists. I mean, that's really kind of what business news is, where I think your goal, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but it seems like it would be more, this is a business and this is how it's impacting the larger community and maybe the general readership of an outlet that's covering what's going on in Colorado. How do you see how you might cover a business different than a straight business journal would?
Yeah, so as I was thinking about this and looking back at some of my stories and stuff, I don't think I've actually written a profile of just one company, since I've been at the Sun, except there was one company, and it was Guild Education back when they became $1 billion company because they had, their most recent raise bumped them all the way up. But I approached the story as a way to get into a topic, and they're a public benefits company, so they're a B Corp. And in that sense, I was able to touch on this huge industry that I think a lot of people aren't as familiar with. And they were just a good lead in for that. So, I mean, what I would tell companies is, I am interested in hearing your pitches, and, you can send me emails, as many emails as you want. I probably won't write.
Careful what you ask for.
Well, as long as you don't expect a response. But
sure.
Something catches my attention, I'm not going to write straight up what you're asking me to write about, but there's usually some sort of other trend there where I can bring in more companies. I mean, this is just, it's to make it more like a story as opposed to a news article. So, I mean, something that, when you click the headline, you're not disappointed in what you're reading because it's just hopefully layered with information that teaches you something. I mean, that's kind of how I approach stories. I want to give something bigger than what you might expect from just a regular story.
Well, and you're not, I can remember even chatting with you, but certainly some of your predecessors at the Denver Post, where they would say to me, that sounds like a really interesting story, and the best I can do is maybe give you 8 column inches, which isn't very much. And I think you're a little bit untethered at the Colorado Sun. You've got more room to, if you were to print those stories out, there's certainly more than 8 column inches, and they tend to be more in depth and just as you say, go into what this means to you, not just here's the story of a company.
Right, and I would say they're still used for shorter stories. I mean, lots of people definitely just prefer to read clips and tweets and stuff like that, and you're still educated and you get by. But there's lots of news organizations that do that. So for the Sun to do something similar, it's like, that's not our purpose. You know, we want to do something a little different where, you know, because we have to earn our members. We have to make sure they value what we do. And if we can dig a little deeper, spend a little more time on it and make it, you know, have fun and write it well. That's kind of what we aim for most of the time.
I think you do a good job. So Shay, I want to shift gears and talk with you a little bit because our audience is folks, I think a lot of folks are either maybe part of a startup or interested in becoming part of a startup, and you are a startup. I'd love to, people that aren't familiar with Boulder Beat, I would love to have you just maybe take a minute, tell us the story. You were with the Daily Camera, and so, you know, as a reporter at the Camera, your job was to come in, cover your beat, kind of go home. And I don't mean to oversimplify that, but you weren't worrying about ad sales, you weren't worrying about revenue necessarily, or it wasn't your job, let's put it that way. I won't say you weren't worrying about it. And now you Boulder Beat is Shay, and Shay is Boulder Beat for the most part. So I'd love to have you maybe share what it was like and maybe what you've learned about how you're approaching journalism maybe slightly differently, given that you're the publisher and editor all at the same time.
Thank you. Yes, I like to call myself a reluctant business owner because I never wanted to be a startup. I just wanted to write the news. And as you know, and other people might not, I started out as a business reporter and I would interview the most amazing people doing the most amazing things and think, I never want to be in charge of things. I just want to write about it. But I kept waiting kind of for the adults to show up and do it, and they never did. And then I realized, oh, well, I'm an adult, so I should do this. And so I don't have ads, so I don't have to worry about that. I am 100% reader supported via Patreon and PayPal. And I have only recently had to start thinking about worrying about revenue. My strategy has just been keep doing the work and people will find me, and they have. I've doubled my revenue and I've doubled my readership over last year. So I started in January of 2019. And it has just kept growing, and I really haven't invested any money in marketing or any of those sort of things. But I have brought on a business advisor unpaid. She volunteered her time very thankfully. And in speaking with some journalism and business professionals around the state who are very free with their advice and time, which is wonderful. The only other model that kind of looks like mine was the Vermont Digger, which is now a very incredibly successful nonprofit. And they kind of started like I did, one person. And the second person they added was a business person, an operations person. And so I think that's going to be the same model that I take once I can afford a second person. But yeah, it is a bit different just being on my own. I think the hardest part is still the journalism piece, not having the editor, not having the support. I really haven't worried much at all about business. And I've been somewhat able to outsource that to volunteers and community members who are just incredibly generous with their time and gifts and skills. So I don't know that I have a ton of information, and I haven't really connected with other startup people because I've never seen myself as a startup person. And I don't know still that I don't feel like a business. I just feel like a journalist. I know I am. It's just I haven't made that switch yet. So I don't know if anyone else has similar experience that you want to reach out to me, but please do. And maybe share, when was that moment that you felt like a legit business rather than just a person doing what you do?
Well, and Tamara, you had some friends to help you, 9 others, and now your staff is larger. And you guys also had, and I won't go into the whole, you had an investor that has since left you guys, but you're now self-funded. But I think there's some interesting business models here to maybe talk about. Jensen works for an outlet that is subscription-based, advertising supported, and firewalled. Colorado Sun is reader supported, not firewalled, and Shay is reader supported, not firewalled as well. But how did you, what's changed for you, Tamara, sitting around the table with your editorial cohorts there, and now you guys are also talking about, okay, now we got to put on the business hat for a minute and see how we're all doing, and where are we with subscribers? And was that something that was completely separate when you were, say, at the Denver Post, for example, or is it something that you were starting to get into as journalism changed and the business model changed?
I would say at the Denver Post, it was separate. But the whole time, here in the newsroom, you're thinking, okay, well, if we just reach this many page views, or if we get to this many, stories online and offline, have this quota, we would be okay because that's our job. That's what we're doing. And yet that wasn't working. So it really frustrated me as a reporter there, not knowing what was happening behind the scenes, because I felt like as a newsroom, we did everything. We went above and beyond to produce, to, take cuts if we had to, or, to be flexible. So, that's one reason why I felt like I had to leave the Post and, take advantage of this opportunity to start the Sun. And so being one of the co-founders, I'm very aware of how many readers we have, how many paying members, how many newsletter subscribers we have, and how to grow that. Because if we want to make a 10 person, and now we're actually at 12 people, 12-person staff sustainable, it's more than just writing great stories. I mean, someone has to figure out how to grow that revenue, how to increase that marketing, so we constantly get new, readers, all of that. And so I'm involved in some of that. I mean, there's other aspects I'm not involved in. I mean, we do have someone trying to find underwriting for us, and I'm not involved in that, though, if she ever needs help, I'm trying to help her. There's different things about it, but, and I'm open to any sort of questions, because to me, I was actually really excited to be part of a startup, because I've been covering startups for years at the Denver Post, and it just seemed really exciting to sort of have, be in control of your destiny. So that's kind of how I feel still.
Perfect. Great. Well, thanks. Jensen, a question. I'll let you kind of start off this round. I want to hear from everybody on this, but I don't even want to guess how many emails each one of you gets every day from people like me, or just from business owners. And, it's like, hey, you wrote about my competitor, you should cover me too. But maybe if each one of you could go around, Jensen, we'll start with you. What kind of emails or phone calls really kind of get your attention? Go, I'd like 10 more of those this week. And which ones are kind of like the, oh, if you only knew, I get 100 of those and I'd like to have 0. And maybe let's just start to open it up so the audience understands, again, not how to get coverage, but how best to engage with you guys, and what types of things you're looking for.
Yeah, so I am like a speed email checker. I go really quickly through, and I'm definitely looking for a few things. Did you mention Denver? If you are a national firm sending this out to every other reporter and there's no Colorado connection, I'm not covering it. Did you spell my name right is a nice thing that I personally like to look for. And does not happen a lot, which I think just sort of goes to this bigger thing that I think we'll talk about in this panel, that a really great way to get a journalist's attention is form a relationship with them. I don't need you to necessarily like find my social media or anything like that, but do you have an awareness of the types of stories that I cover? Do you know what the Denver Business Journal is, the types of stories we do? Are you familiar with the types of stories I'm looking for? Is something that I think you can see reflected in pitches a lot of the times. People who are pitching me and doing a good job of it are letting me know that this is something that is new or breaking or even exclusive. I mean, if we go back to what I mentioned earlier, that I'm trying to give analysis and business intelligence to the business community, then the fact that you gave this information to me first is of importance to me. So I think I'm really looking for that this is a Denver story, that you're not just like a Denver idea, but that you're a Denver company, that you've got credentials. I want to know that you're going to share information with me, that you're going to talk about revenue or venture capital raised to date. It always kind of blows my mind when I get a pitch for a story about, oh, we just closed this Series C, but we're not going to tell you how much we raised. It's kind of like, it's not a
can go on Edgar and find out. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, why make your life hard?
I'm not in the world of covering ideas. I'm covering business news. So I need the pitches that I'm getting to be business news for Denver, for the business community.
Got it. Tamara, how about you? You said you'd take an email from anybody. What kind of jumps out of your email box, and what do you do with it when something does look, understanding that the chances of you saying, wow, that's a company I didn't know existed, I'm going to go do a feature on them, that's really not, for the most part, where you are. So what type of, maybe an example of somebody who sent you an email and probably hoping for a feature on their company, but it turned into something different, or you used them as a source, or it turned into a trend piece. Does anything like that pop to the top of your mind?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say in some ways I'm similar to Jensen, where I look at subject lines and that's about it. But in that sense, yeah, I mean, send me emails, because I don't delete my emails. And when I am on a story, maybe about broadband or cybersecurity or something 6 months down the road, you actually may get an email from me. And if you don't respond, that's your fault. But I feel like most of the emails really are irrelevant to me, because I'm not going to cover a new store opening or, many of the things that maybe Jensen might be covering. But one example of a story I'm thinking about is someone had told me it's about tips, and it's about exclusivity. It's about, a story. If you're pitching everybody else, and with an embargo, and I have strong feelings about embargoes, I'm not going to write about it, because there's other media out there who will, because that's their job. But one example I can think of is someone was telling me about a broadband project. And when, I started looking into it, because I do cover broadband, but I ended up writing a story about impact finance. So because it was sort of a nonprofit effort to fund a broadband effort in rural Colorado. And the way they could do it was possibly by impact investors, which I hadn't really known about. I just started learning about this whole group of investment. So, I think a lot of my stories, I think a lot of the pitches that turn into stories weren't the intended pitch that they became. And I feel like instead of, I don't mind the emails again, but I feel like a lot of my good stories come from conversations with PR people or sources or company executives. And those are where the best stories come from. And so I try to be open. And if you pitch me that way, I'm sure we can talk about things.
Perfect. Shay, I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, Jensen. Sorry.
I was going to add, Tamara made me remember two things that I want to add to this. If you're pitching a publication with multiple reporters, I think it does help send to the reporter that you're trying to reach directly. If you are a restaurant, I'm not your girl. If you're a tech, healthcare, that's me. That's not Greg or Ed. Similarly, I would say if you're pitching to the Business Journal, you have to make your top people available. We're not just interviewing the spokesperson. We're not giving you free PR. So if you're having a big announcement, we're trying to get to the why of the story. And that means making your CEO COO, CTO available. And I think that's important because I don't know if a lot of startups would know that, that this isn't a PR thing. This is a business news story, which means we have to talk to your people with the top business insight into your company.
I'm going to throw one out here too that I may be going to do you guys a quick favor, but I've chewed on any number of clients in my career for, hey, let's do a press release on Monday and then let's all go out of town, or let's go to a trade show where we're not available Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's like, I'll come find you at the trade show. I promise that we have those conversations in advance, but I think that's really important. If I want to pitch you and then you like the story, whether you like it as a variation, the way Tamara was talking about it, or you're right, that's a tech story, that's Colorado Impact, that's me, that's Jensen, and then you're not available, that's like, hey, that's just crazy. So make yourself available. I love that you brought that up. Shay, I was going to go to this place for you, because I think a lot of times you get, I'm sure you get, you've been out there long enough now that you're getting pitches, and I know how bad some of the pitches can be. But let's say that, and let's use our track sponsor Zayo as a for example. They might not have pitched you on anything, or maybe they did, but it could be that you're writing about something municipal broadband related for Boulder or something in Boulder County, and you'd love to get some input from Zayo or a company like Zayo. Talk to me about what you hope to get out of those outreaches and how that can help really establish a company as somebody that you like to work with. If they're cooperative, thoughtful, can help you out with things. Not, if they can't tell you, they can't tell you for a million different reasons. But I think a lot of people don't respond well, or don't expect to get a call from Shay or Tamara or Jensen with a question that is relating to another story, but you're asking them to basically be a source for you. I'd love to hear about how you guys build that up, how you appreciate that, and maybe some ways that some of these companies could reach out to you and say, hey, I might not be that interesting today, but I'm really focused on this thing that, who knows, could be something down the road. Is that something that you guys would be appreciative of and would keep around in a file someplace to call?
Absolutely. And I think Jensen and Tamara already touched on this. The one thing I wanted to add to that last discussion was a lot of folks reach out to me, particularly in the business world, and ask for my help connecting with the right government person or the right information on a particular topic. And that's a really great way to establish a relationship, because I almost always know who you need to talk to in the government. And I almost always can find that information for you. And like Tamara said, I keep my emails when they're from people I don't know, and I file them in my sources file. And as a business, that's a really great way to establish a relationship is, are you there for me when you don't need something from me? I know those people who only reach out when they want something, and I don't like them, and I won't reach out to them unless I absolutely have to, because journalism is a two-way street. It's like democracy. It's going to happen with or without you. It's better with you. And so if you can become that person who can either weigh in publicly for a story or help connect me with people, I use those folks a lot. Like, hey, who do you know that I can talk to for this? And like Jensen said, there's really no better way to eventually get the coverage that you want and need than to have a relationship with the media. But you have to be willing to hear no as well.
I want to touch on two things about that really quick. One is, I'm a great believer, and I always counsel my clients, and I hope you can say that we do this. If you call me and say, can you comment on this? Sometimes the answer is no, we can't. For it's proprietary, we're publicly traded, there's a reason that we can't speak right now. But at least call you back and say, I wish I could, but I can't. Just not calling back is not okay. But one of the questions I had on my list is, and I think this is and I get this from people looking to hire my company a lot. It's like, well, Tamara, Jensen, Shay, can't you just pick up the phone and get them to do you a quick favor and cover my company? I won't make those calls, but I'd love to hear from you guys that I think that's a misnomer. And maybe it was, the Samantha character on Sex and the City that everybody thought that's the way PR works, but it's not. And you guys, it's your job. I mean, thank you. I think you all kind of did me a favor by being on this panel, but that's an appropriate ask, as opposed to, would you run a crappy story that's going to get you in hot water with your editor, if you can even get it past your editor? That just doesn't happen. I would love to hear kind of how, like, Jensen, if you think the story's good, where you have to pitch it. You're not the end all and be all, nor is Tamara. Shay, you kind of are, because it's your thing, but you've got your readers are your end all and be all. If you write garbage, they're not going to come back and they're not going to support you on Patreon. So who maybe wants to chat about that a little bit? Because I think that's important for business owners to understand.
I'll take that very quickly and then leave it to the actual people who cover business now. But I think people really do need to understand that's an ethical consideration for journalists. There are no such thing as favors. You just can't. You can't give favorable coverage to someone you like or to someone who asks for it. I don't think that means don't ask, as long as you're also there when I ask for stuff. Like, because if someone asks me to cover a story, I feel bad if I can't. And I tend to remember them and think, like, how can I reach out to them in the future, just so they know that I'm there and accessible and care. That doesn't mean I'm going to give them coverage, but I'm still a human being and from the Midwest, so I have a hard time saying no. But the other thing is, please ask yourself when you're pitching things, at least this is especially true for me as a single person operation, and I put it in my newsletter every week with every story, why you should care. And that's when we teach journalists to do stories: who, what, when, where, why the hell should I care? And so if you can't answer that question for a large swath of the readership, why should they care? Then this is not a story that I'm going to spend my time on and that you should be pitching me on. I mean, keep doing it anyway. I don't want to discourage you, but that's when you'll hear no from me personally.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, I already touched on what I'm looking for. So I'm not going to harp on that, but I will say a relationship can be a long one before I end up covering a company, especially if you're a startup, because I am looking for, I mean, the companies I'm covering are Ibotta and CenturyLink, now Lumen, and Amazon. I'm covering like big public companies or unicorn companies, big ones. And I'm looking for the next one of those, but I'm probably not covering you when you're still doing your angel or seed rounds. But that being said, I had a company that I covered recently who had been pitching these stories for the last year and a half. And I had even interviewed them multiple times. And each time was kind of like, it's not for us yet. Not a business journal story yet. Not yet. 3 times before I eventually had an interview with them. And I was like, yeah, you guys are there. This is a business journal story. You're raising big money. You've got multiple customers. You're post revenue. This is your a Denver Business Journal business now. And so I, similar to Tamara and Shay, don't delete a single email. It probably would drive inbox zero people crazy, but I just like to have that store, because you do get those companies that have been pitching me for the last year. Going to what you said also about sources and experts, I think a great way to start a relationship with a journalist is just to send an email or do a call, or back when we could do a coffee meeting, and just say, hey, I know a lot about cybersecurity. This is my specialty, or I know a lot about ABC. Anytime you have a question about it, give me a call, because I am a person in my late 20s with a journalism and sustainability studies degree. I know nothing about software engineering or the healthcare industry beyond what I'm being taught by sources or learning through reading and the internet. So to have someone say, hey, let me explain this to you, let me break down this industry to you, is just essential. I'm trying to now share what I've learned with a massive Denver audience. So to have those people who can say, hey, maybe I'll cover my company someday, but right now I can tell you what you need to know about this, or this, is just amazing, and I don't forget it.
That's great. Tamara, I want to come back to embargoes, if you don't mind, because I have some strong feelings about them as well. And I think they might be more aligned with you than you might believe. But maybe start a little bit and tell the audience, some people might know what an embargoed release is, some people might not. So maybe start with that. And then kind of tell us, how they land when they hit the desk of a reporter.
So embargoes are when a company asks, hey, I'll share this news with you, but you can't write anything until X date at X time. Do you agree? Or else I'm not going to share it with you. And to me, it might have been different in past jobs, but right now it's like, well, so that means to me that everybody is going to have the same piece of news with your press release. So I will be competing against your press release as well as everybody else. So what's in it for me? I don't know. It's a PR promotion for you, or I just don't really have anything good to say. Plus, embargoes can be broken. I think I just heard about one last week, but actually one big one I remember agreeing to, and this was when I was at my last job, but when Dish Network announced Sling TV. So this happened at the Consumer Electronics Show, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And they had told me about it. So I'd written something, about this big launch. And of course, I think CNET broke the embargo. So they sent out an email saying, oh, everyone can write their story now because the embargo's been broken. And it's like, well, of course the embargo's been broken. What are you not going to talk to CNET anymore? Of course not. So, it really depends on the publication, how much power they have. But for most local news, it doesn't help any of us. So
personally, I can tell you when I used embargoes in my career, but this was very different. This was kind of pre-internet, so I'm going to date myself now. But I remember, and Jensen, this is home base for you. I can remember when your deadline at the Denver Business Journal for the Friday print edition, which was that was it, because that was before you guys were online, was Wednesday at 2. So if I sent out a news release Thursday at 4, now the Denver Post and back in the day, the Rocky Mountain News could do something with it for their Friday edition, but I just screwed the Denver Business Journal out of the news. And because you guys now had to wait a whole other week, so chances are you wouldn't cover it. So what we would do a lot of times, to be back to your point, Tamara, to be fair, is go to the DBJ and say, listen, this news release is going to go out tomorrow to the Post and the News. We'll give it to you today if you agree. And this was the early days of the internet. If you agree not to put it online, because we can't give the DBJ a favor over the Post and the News, but we want everybody to be able to break with it on Friday. So we want to put this news out fair and square, but we recognize that you've got a publication difference. Sometimes it was even more so with, big tech publications that have 3 and 4 month lead times. We want to get some news out to them so they could cover it in a timely fashion. But short of that, and I don't know how you feel about those, Tamara, but that was an effort to give everybody a chance not to break the story Friday at 10, but to have the information and make your decision if you wanted to cover it based on, okay, they gave it to me and everybody else at the same time. They were upfront about that. Short of that, I can't think of a really good reason to use embargoes, to be really honest with you. It's like, put the news out when you got the news, and when you're ready to talk about it, talk about it. I think the chances of it going sideways, as you say, with a broken embargo, are every bit as good as it benefiting. I can't figure out who it benefits, really.
I'll say, I think there's a hierarchy of the way a company can share its news with the publication. And the worst way is just to send your press release out to everyone. Embargoes, not much better. As a reporter, I'd rather have, if I'm going to have to compete with everyone anyway on it, if it's business news that I'm going to need to cover, I guess I would rather have it ahead of time so I can pre-write it and do an interview and try to distinguish myself that way. But I think the best way to share news is pick the publication that's right for your audience, give them the exclusive, make your people available, give the reporter time to work on it. Because as a reporter, I'm not trying to screw over anybody. want to fact check. I want to do this all ethically and on the up and up, because I hope that this is a relationship and not a one-time thing. And I think companies make the mistake of trying to just spray out their story to everyone and see who bites it, which is a technique, but I don't think the best technique. I don't think, especially in Denver, when there's so many great niche publications, that is going to be exactly right for your market. Pitch it to that reporter. I think there's companies like Amazon's and Facebook's and these massive companies who sort of do things one way and people try to emulate them. And I don't always think that's the best way, especially if you're a local company, to do the news.
Great. We've got a really good question in the Q&A, and I'm just going to read this verbatim, so forgive me for reading here. But the question is, we're collecting new data/insights on plastic pollution. What's the best way to share that with journalists? Publish our reports or blog posts publicly and share those, or send out the report or data privately? What are the pros and cons of being exclusive versus sharing it with multiple publications? Thanks. And thanks for the question, by the way. I'm not going to say who it's from, simply because I'm afraid I will butcher their name. But thank you very much for the question. Who wants to jump in with that? Shay, that is almost a little bit of one for you, because that's kind of feels like it might have some public policy implications and whatnot. So what I'd love to hear from each one of you on that.
Well, I think Jensen just addressed that kind of beautifully. And I don't want to get into giving advice. I will leave that to the PR professionals. But I perked up because people in Boulder care very much about the environment, so they say. And so they would probably be very interested in some pollution data, specifically from plastics. And if you are aware, Colorado, the legislature for the last couple of years, I believe, has been considering repealing legislation that keeps different municipalities from banning certain materials. So right now, Boulder can't ban styrofoam or plastics. And forgive me if that's already passed and I don't know that. But anyway, that's something that's being considered. So it might be timely. And I mean, I personally would like to see that in an email to my publication, not already posted in a blog post, because it feels a little, I don't know what the right word is, but it feels like journalists need to report out information that isn't already out there, if that makes sense. So that's how personally I would like to see it.
And do you think too, and again, I'll throw this out to the panel, but the angle that, you know, if you get creative with your angles and you offer Jensen, hey, I've got all this data. Jensen, I think, this is a real impact to the Colorado business community. Tamara, this is a real impact to consumers in Colorado. You'd probably both really appreciate individualized pitches along those ways. And at that point, you wouldn't you wouldn't feel like you were stepping on each other. You'd be making the story your own, even if you both chose to cover it.
I would say, if it's a good story, everyone's going to cover it. But also, we all have different audiences. So yeah, I mean, think about who we are as reporters and writers, but also think about who we're trying to write for. It's with Jensen, she has a very, business company type reader. But for me, I'm looking at readers all over Colorado. They care about certain topics, and you can tell that by the sort of beats we have and the stories we're writing about. So, I think just as you said, Doyle, it can be very targeted per publication with different angles of the same data. And again, all the stories may not break at once, which may be good for your company, because then you'll get, weeks of coverage instead of one hour's worth. So that's
exactly. We have a colleague at MEPR that would say that's taking multiple bites from the same apple. So we have that. A good comment on embargoes, to go back to that for a minute, just showed up in the chat. And somebody said, if launching a physical product, the fear of release of the news, but product not available, or crowdfunding released, the embargo allows for syncing. So it allows for pre-release, for testing, for interviews, et cetera. A very, very fair point. my point would be, I can go to, let's say Jensen actually tested products. She was a gadget tester. I could go to her and say, hey, I got this to you. We're not going to release this until October 1st or whatever it is. Would you like to have a pre-release copy without the formal embargoed release that kind of opened things up? Having worked in hardware, I've done quite a bit of that. So, yeah, I think what we're learning here, if I were to pull a headline so far, is there is no one size fits all. I mean, when Apple's going to have a big event on, is it tomorrow, I think? And that's something that if you write tech, you're probably going to have to cover it. So they need to blast things out and they need to get to as many people as possible. But short of you being Apple, the better approach is, what might Tamara like to cover? How could I be thoughtful and helpful to Tamara versus Jensen versus Shay, and really tailor your pitch, as opposed to, typing tech into a service like Cision, getting 622 reporters back, writing one pitch and pushing a button and saying you're done for the day. That's really probably not going to ring much of a bell with any one of you.
Coming from a tech background, I think embargoes really did not do the PR industry any good. Maybe because it was for products or services and stuff like that. But if you look at it, there are tech news sites that will report that stuff and they want those exclusives. But then there's probably 3 or 4, maybe 10 times more tech news sites that will just regurgitate that. So I like what Doyle said. If you are giving, if you're just sharing it with the reporters, leave it up to them to figure out when is a good time to write about it. I think for all 3 of us, though, I don't think any of us are doing gadget reviews or product reviews.
Yeah. Although I think somebody is the gadgetress on Twitter here. So
I used to do product reviews, actually.
Yeah,
when I was
I know.
in Orange County. So
right. One last thing I want to touch on before we're starting to wrap up time here. But since we're in a startup audience, a lot of people are doing crowdfunding. And I get calls all the time to, hey, can you help me pitch my crowdfunding site to people like you? And I've found that that's not something you guys are real crazy about, but I'd love to hear it from the horse's mouth. I launched something on Kickstarter newsworthy? I know the answer to that, but I want to hear it from you guys. Or I've now funded on Kickstarter, or pick your poison. How do you feel about any of those?
I will go. I think our silence pretty much speaks for itself, but
I think you're right.
I just don't care. I already said in here, does it impact who my audience is, which my audience is residents of Boulder. Why do they care? And if they don't, if it doesn't impact their life, if I can't answer that question, why they should care about it, then I just don't care. I'm sorry. Every once in a while, I might. Like if we're in a crisis and whatever you're doing could be helpful to that crisis, I might put a link to that in my newsletter. I did a crowdfunding for the CU student paper in my newsletter, but that's obviously something that people should care about, journalism and kids, kids, young adults. But yeah, most of the time I don't care. Sorry.
I would take it one step further and just talk about startups and how, at past jobs, I love covering startups. I love the energy. I love the innovation and really cool ideas. But was that company going to be around in 3 months or in 6 months? Is it worth my time to really do a good story when I don't know for sure? It just seemed like a good idea. It almost becomes like a tweet. So it's hard because I know there's this community, but I think there's publications out there that are covering you guys. I mean, even Jensen, you mentioned Inno, right? There's definitely groups that will cover you. And I think as long as you know who you're targeting, focus on those publications. And if it's really exciting, I think it will spread and get picked up elsewhere.
Perfect. All right, with that, I think we are just about, I'm kind of looking over at my producers here, but I think we're coming up on the end of our time together. to give everybody a chance to get on to the next piece. So I want to take a moment and thank Tamara and Jensen and Shay for spending some time with us today and just having this great conversation. And again, I hope that the audience took out of this of, build a relationship with reporters, think about what you send out. Spray and pray isn't the right answer. And, but if you reach out and spend some time together, what I really liked, and I can't remember which one of you said it, because we get it all the time where we'll send out a pitch and it'll be crickets. And lo and behold, 8 months later, we get an email that's just like, hey, are you guys still working with such and so? And it's just wonderful. That's when we know that we've done something that resonated. But everybody needs to understand that you guys are not just sitting at your desk waiting for a PR person or a startup founder to call you. You got plenty to do, and you got plenty that your editors are telling you to work on, or that your readers are hoping that you work on. And the important thing is to figure out how to fit into those moments and be patient for those moments to come around. So with that, I'll ask my crew to remind me in the chat if I'm forgetting to thank anybody, but thanks again to our track sponsor, Zayo, for this. Thanks so much for being a part of Denver Startup Week. It's only day one. There's 4 days left and lots of great stuff out there. I've been with companies, I say this about Startup Week all the time, that paid a lot of money to fly me to different cities to go to seminars and whatnot to get the education that I think the Startup Weeks supply for free that are absolutely outstanding. So again, Jensen and Shay and Tamara, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we'll let's go watch some Denver Broncos or do one more Startup Week before the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks all.
Bye.